As I say, I've always had a hard time with the divisiveness of politics and the anger and lack of compassion that came along with it for the other point of view, and I just wanted to avoid it. But it's also hard to get away from it, especially growing up in a city like Manhattan. When I was a kid, my mother would encourage me to join marches and protests in the streets of New York. Anything from preserving the dignity and quality of the art and culture of the city with Save the Bandshell in Central Park, to protests against the banks and rising costs of rent in the city, to cutting classes in high school to join the protests against the Gulf War. At the same time that I admired my mother's conviction and passion for these things, I also had an adverse reaction to it all, in that there was always an underlying anger and discontentment with anyone that didn't agree with any given stance. I didn't see true progress. I saw small battles that appeared to be won, but they ironically seemed to usher in more problems. So I removed myself from the conversation for the most part and just sort of parroted a few talking points in the most surface level way possible. A little over a decade later, I would be working in the entertainment industry for BBC and HBO, and I found both places aligned very well with the same politics that I grew up with. BBC and HBO were both left-leaning, progressive, liberal. Their documentaries proved to be interesting subjects in presenting the unseen, the unknown struggles of people trying to fight for their freedoms, their rights as unique individuals, or as a society. Like all office jobs, there was always political chatter. The unspoken definition of left-leaning meant, of course, that the Democrats were the open-minded, tolerant ones, open to change, open-minded, open to progress, open to newness, developing, growing, evolving. They hated war and money laundering and corrupt big business, and any threat to democracy, any threat to freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of press. After HBO, I started working for Jen Sanko, and she was in the early stages of writing the outline for her movie.
Jennifer, is this your book?
Yes.
Hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
I'm going to tell you a little story. You're blocking the light. I met Jen at a filmmakers cooperative workshop on documentary filmmaking.
I'm still rolling.
Yeah. So, here we go. I would be sitting on a little pillow, so it would be
Jen was putting together a personal project about her father, and I was putting together a project about my grandfather.
You like this?
Yeah.
I really love this, by the way. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just zoomed in ever so slightly, just ever so.
Projects that were very deep and meaningful for both of us.
Is that a handsome dude or what?
Yeah.
Well, these are little cutouts I made for brochures.
Look, here you are on his shoulder.
Oh, you think of that.
All right, tell me, who is this man?
I was intrigued by the angle she was approaching her documentary film with. It was specifically targeting the mainstream media, and it had a personal twist. She saw her father change so drastically from sweet and fun to mean and angry, and it seemed to directly correlate to his immersing himself in right-wing media, and she was on a quest to understand why.
Suddenly he didn't like black people, or poor people, or gay people, or Hispanics, or feminists, or lawyers, and Democrats, forget it. What happened to Dad?
I shot some behind-the-scenes footage at the audio recording studio in Harlem that Jen and her friends were working out of.
It's the story of how right-wing media changed the course of the nation.
And I began to edit parts of Jen's documentary for her as we went along and started pulling together my own research on the subjects. As she was laying the outline and fleshing it out with her co-writer Mel, I began researching it bit by bit too, and began to co-write parts of it with them. That's how I began contributing to the writing process with Jen. At that time, I had put together an online magazine inspired by my grandfather. I called it Mandrake Magazine and wrote an article about Jen's film and called it Brainwashing Giants. And then, as the film was gaining so much traction, so much exposure on social media, Hollywood actor Matthew Modine reached out to Jen and said he wanted to produce the film.
I wanted to meet interesting and stimulating people of an ancient culture and kill them.
So he came on not only as producer, but also the narrator of the film, along with Jen.
It's a story about a media phenomenon that changed a father and divided a nation.
As time went by, it was no longer just about Jen's dad. It became about all the people that were calling in and writing in and saying they noticed the mainstream media having the same stark effect on their loved ones as well.
I had a Kickstarter campaign to raise some money, and before I knew it, people were coming out of the woodwork, contacting me from all over the country, telling me similar stories. And I thought, wow, this is a real phenomenon.
They just drummed into her what they wanted her to hear. She's a completely different person.
My brother became very fact resistant.
My reaction was, who are you and what have you done with my stepfather?
Disjointed existence. And he was completely changed. He was bitter and angry.
At one point, he threatened to get a bus because
He
it was
became
challenging.
Obsessed.
And she had never been like that.
He was carrying a small pistol.
She was not hateful.
Shot twice.
It broke my heart to see my parents.
Very loving,
I feel I don't really know these people anymore.
Just goes on these tirades that
Fundamentally.
So yeah, whenever you're ready, and can you see me all right?
Yeah, I can see you, Käla.
Oh, okay, good. We knew it was an important topic as more and more people reached out to help finance the project too. There were angel investors, and so we knew that this was quite the phenomenon going on. Isn't that quite a story, babe? So the brainwashing of my dad was really where my research skills began. At one point, I spoke with a researcher at Democracy Now! Studio in Manhattan, asking him for recommendations on where I can research sources he uses to find footage and other materials for the shows. And he was so generous and helpful. I'm truly grateful for his help. I found an amazing young author named Gabe Sherman, who had just published an extensive biography book on Roger Ailes. We reached out to him and added him to the long list of interviewees for the film.
Roger Ailes was a pioneer in the whole art of the soundbite. He told Nixon that America is dumb. So give them something simple, boil it down, and they'll get it.
I learned so much over the years we spent working on this film. It gave me historical facts about how the media was built.
The spring of 1970, after Nixon orders the invasion of Cambodia, which was the instigation for the same protests at Kent State University that led to the deaths of the 4 students. One of the protests was at Federal Hall in Lower Manhattan. And right in the middle of this anti-war rally, this almost marauding army of construction workers came marching in their hard hats, and started beating the protesters with their hard hats. It was all captured on film. It was on the evening news. Rather than excoriating these basically vigilantes, Richard Nixon invites the head of construction trades in New York, Peter Brennan, and Peter Brennan presents the commander-in-chief with a ceremonial hard hat. So he's almost kind of throwing his lot with the people who are beating the protesters.
By 71, you had cities burning because people were saying the change is not happening fast enough. Virtually every group in America, other than wealthy white guys, was in open revolt and calling for change. Now, it wasn't tear down the government change. I mean, this is being covered by the CBS Evening News and Walter Cronkite.
Roger Ailes as advisor to Nixon's presidential campaign.
Richard Nixon, who by all accounts was a very smart, a brilliant man who had a command of the issues, he couldn't connect with the audience. You know, he came off as stiff, as shifty-eyed, as famously in the 1960 presidential debate against John Kennedy, he was sweating. It was a terrible performance. Then he meets Roger Ailes in 1968. At the time, Roger Ailes was a young producer, the wonderkind of television at the age of 26. And so Roger Ailes coached Richard Nixon on how to communicate those ideas to the average American who was watching television every night at dinner table. Richard Nixon, whose political career almost blew up because of television, was able to win the presidency because he mastered it.
The advent of the soundbite
TV had finally become a mass medium, and yet there really weren't people who had decoded the medium. Roger Ailes told Nixon that to appeal to the audience, he needed to use short, snappy one-liners that can stick in the audience's mind.
A great philosophy is never won without defeat. It is always won without fear.
And the GOP memo?
Written in 1970, this memo talks about how television had become the most powerful news source because people are lazy and want their thinking done for them. It became the blueprint for Fox News, and although its authorship is unclear, Roger Ailes' handwritten notes are seen throughout the document.
The Lewis Powell memo.
This confidential Lewis Powell memo was from August 1971, just a year after the Roger Ailes memo.
What he claimed is that the whole country is being taken over by the radical left, the government, the media, the universities, of course.
We have a problem. Our best and brightest of our students do not want to become conservative businessmen. We have to change this. We have to get wealthy conservatives to put their money together to appoint professors in major universities to teach our principles. We have to set up and support organizations in major universities to do this. They said we can't trust the universities. We have to set up our own research establishments, which became the think tanks. We have to make sure that they get published. Start journals, start publishing houses so they can publish their books. And we have to buy media so their ideas can get out.
The 1996 Telecommunications Act.
One of the biggest steps forward to handing our whole media system to a handful of corporations was completely bipartisan. It was the 1996 Telecommunications Reform Act, and I put reform in quotes. Consumer rights advocates were calling it the Time Warner Enrichment Act. But President Bill Clinton and the Democrats were getting huge soft money donations from the big media and telecommunications companies. So was the Republican Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. And together, behind closed doors, they developed this Telecommunications Act, which gave away the media to these few big companies. These few fat companies got even fatter. Mainstream media didn't scrutinize it because they were getting rich at the top. And when you have that kind of bipartisan corruption corrupting our media system, it explains why we ended up with the media system we have.
Signing the Telecommunications Act set the stage for something even bigger, something that would change the media landscape forever.
And of course, Rupert Murdoch and the agendas of the handful of corporations that own all of the media we depend on.
Rupert Murdoch is a media giant. He owns news organizations all over the world. These include TV, the internet, magazines, newspapers, and books. That's a lot of influence for one man.
In terms of you having a global media enterprise, I mean, have you shaped that agenda at all?
Obviously, if you're in media and you're concerned with what's going on in the world, you'd like to make a difference by putting forward your opinion.
Thanks in part to the Telecommunications Act, Rupert Murdoch's News Corp conglomerate grew even larger. And guess whom he hired to create Fox News?
I was fascinated by the mainstream media tactics, the forces behind the scenes that utilize psychology, the use of emotion and fear, bright colors, and a little bit of seduction. The psychological advertising was borrowed directly from Edward Bernays, the brains behind the 1930s advertising, the author of the book Propaganda, and he was also the nephew of Sigmund Freud. It was interesting, and I wondered how some of these exact tactics seem to have the same effect on the Democratic side of the media.
Fox News grew to be the dominant cable news network, and its effect on the other major news stations was profound.
The most dangerous thing about Fox News is not the fact that it exists and speaks to its audience of a few million people. It's the effect that Fox can have on the rest of the media. Time and again, you will see a false and wrong story that is aired and starts moving through the Fox News channel on a given day, and it bleeding over or spilling over into mainstream institutions of journalism. Media critics coined this term, Fox effect, to mean media is an ecosystem and all media affects other media.
That's one of the beauties of WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks is really a form of journalism that's desperately needed in the existing system, because the mainstream media won't collect and report data such as WikiLeaks will collect. You have to have masses of people organizing and putting pressure on really what it amounts to is a revolution. I mean, some kind of political, economic, social revolution, because you have a powerfully embedded system. To change it significantly, change the media significantly, you have to have people organized and force a change.
Academy Award nominee Bill Plimpton, the cartoonist, came on board. Jen would hand him several concepts, and he and his team would pull together some cool animations for the film. We also had other talented digital artists like Bobby Chang from my time at HBO. He did some great title motion graphics. It was such a large project with many amazing professionals and artists and great minds all working together. As we were nearing the end of the film, Michael Moore invited us to screen at his Traverse Film Festival in Michigan, so the edit was handed off to Matthew Modine's graphic artist, and he also became the creative director for the film. So the edit was handed off to him for 2 weeks so he could do graphic designing, update and swap out the temporary graphics with his own. He also did color correcting and other things. As the creative director, he was in charge of the final look of the film and put on all the final touches. And then it was off to the audio engineer, sound design, sound effects, audio levels, and then to the post-production studio for the finishings, where they made the DCP for the theater screening. When we completed the film, it went off to many film festivals and won many awards. In 2015, Michael Moore invited The Brainwashing of My Dad to screen an early cut, and the film was a big hit. This is Jen and Michael Moore. And on March 18th, 2016, there was the official release of the film in theaters in both California and New York City, coast to coast. As Jen has mentioned in interviews and in the companion book for her film, I was non-political, but became more political while working on this movie with her. That's true, but it didn't really stick with me over the following decade, except for a short stint coming straight off the release of the film, because I was quite inspired by Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. He pointed the finger at the big banks and the corruption of the 1%, which I believe brought people together to look at who was really pulling the strings and not point the finger at each other. But in the end, as we see today, especially since COVID-19, the left-leaning audiences of the mainstream media also become angry and rageful towards their brothers and sisters who don't agree with them.
If you are the unvaccinated, you are the problem.
You're the problem. Condemn them, shame them, blame them.
The only people that you can blame are the unvaccinated.
Frankly, we can't trust the unvaccinated.
They should not be part of polite society.
The lunatics who won't take COVID vaccines walking around lawfully unvaccinated? That's psychotic.
If you're willing to walk among us unvaccinated, you are an enemy.
Vaccinated person having a heart attack? Yes, come right on in. We'll take care of you. Unvaccinated guy, rest in peace, Wheezy.
Some doctors are saying they'll refuse treatment for people who choose not to get the shot.
Unvaccinated clown.
One of the biggest issues of today is that most citizen researchers stop at the so-called fact-checkers, when in fact those exact fact-checkers should be examined as well. Snopes, for example, is heavily relied upon. However, a deeper look into their background reveals that Snopes may not be the experts we would want to rely upon. It wasn't until 2020 that these research skills of mine would be refined and upgraded. I went straight to source material. Independent journalists such as Ryan Christian from The Last American Vagabond and James Corbett from The Corbett Report took the time to show their audiences how to research responsibly. That really helped me. I am eternally grateful to them for their time and energy and patience and tireless work. It has been one of the single most motivating and valuable teachings that I've had. which brought me to the place where I not only wrote and directed the film adaptation for The Real Anthony Fauci, but was able to research and pass on some of what I learned to other members. I've realized that this is a skill that should be taught to everyone, because when it is refined and done properly, when we follow the money, when we check the checkers, then knowledge becomes real power. And that power can really assist as a stepping stone in truly bringing people closer together.